People of Reddit, what's the creepiest encounter you've had with a complete stranger that still gives you chills? When my son was a toddler, I made a late-night run to a 24-hour Walgreens to pick up a prescription for him. We lived in an urban area where that Walgreens was actually busy at that time of night. It was also right next to a metro stop and was not a place where most people drove. So parking was super limited. I ended up parking at a curb a bit away from the store. When I got back to my car, a youngish, very normal-looking guy came up to my window. I rolled it down a bit and he said, "I think I know you from XYZ place." I had actually been to XYZ place before. XYZ place was also a very popular place, so I tried to remember him. In that split second that I hesitated trying to remember him, his eyes went completely black, his whole face changed, and he grabbed the door handle of my car and tried to open it. I put the car in drive and peeled out of there looking straight ahead. Only when I got to a red light a few streets away did I realize that the overhead light was on. He had actually opened my door a bit and I hadn't realized. I never forgot his face, how it changed. I remember one of Ted Bundy's victims described how his face went from normal, attractive, friendly to black-eyed, unrecognizable, and frenzied. That's how this man transformed. There were some missing women in our city and I always wondered if this guy did it. I was playing at the end of the trailer park and a guy pulled up in a convertible. He said he knew my mom and held up a Polaroid across the front seat. I saw the lady didn't have the right hair color and said so. He got frustrated and insisted I should come closer to be sure. I said, "No, I'm actually going to get lunch now. Sorry." He gave me a fake smile and left, so I turned around. My neighbor, who later again saved my life quite literally, was walking up with an odd expression in her purse. Found out a few years later that she had a 357 in there and there was a serial killer killing young boys in the city for about 3 years around then. I was in a grocery store doing my weekly shop and was approached by a man who said I was pretty and asked for my number. No intros, no asking me how I'm doing, just getting straight to it. I politely declined and said I wasn't interested. He became persistent, so I ended up telling him to just give me his number so I could end the interaction. After he gives me his number, I go back to shopping without incident, or so I think. It turns out that this man was keeping an eye on me from the dairy section as I was walking up and down the aisles. As I'm getting ready to head to checkout, he decides to approach me again. This time, he's super agitated and raises his voice while asking why I won't just give him my number. I decide to be direct and tell him that I said I wasn't interested and I will not be giving my number to a stranger. He really had an issue with it, became irate, and had to be removed from the store. I was walked to my car, and he ended up following me out of the parking lot. I was on my street when I noticed I was being followed, drove past my house, and started driving towards the police station in my city. He followed me until he realized I was turning into that driveway, and then sped off. Luckily I hadn't seen him since. I was driving on a back road at night heading to my parents' house when a Cadillac started following me. It was a one-lane road at night, dizzling on and off, and this guy the first notice has been following me for a little over 2 miles. At first I thought it was paranoia, so I used my blinker and they copied me. Every time I did it, a sole blue light then went off on their hood behind me, I guess trying to get me to pull over. I called 911 and stayed on the line until the police intercepted me. The guy ended up being wanted on warrants for skipping bail on an SA charge. Definitely came way too close that night. I was in Vienna during Christmas break. There is a large open-air market in the middle of the city and thousands of people were milling about, eating, drinking, and shopping in the evening. A very attractive blonde woman with light blue eyes bumps into me, and in accented English apologizes. I said, "No worries," and we started chatting. She says she's from Poland and she's here for New Year's visiting a friend. I mentioned I'm American but Polish in heritage and we continue to talk for several minutes. She says that she's hungry and wants to get food. I offered to buy her a slice of pizza at a booth. I get one for both of us and she takes a bite and says she doesn't like it and wants to go to a place away from the town center. Something about how quickly she rejected the pizza, which was quite good, set off alarms, and I wished her a pleasant evening and walked away. I looped around the town center and coincidentally saw her walking down an alley with 2 large men, one on each side of her. Very quickly I realized that she was bait to draw me into an alley so they could mug me. I definitely dodged a bullet that day. When I was 9, I was in Kmart with my uncle in the television section. It was Saturday morning and he sat me and my little sister down and told us to watch the cartoons on the TVs while he hunted down a salesperson. Not 2 minutes after he was gone, we were approached by 2 men and they tried everything to lure us out. We were petrified and didn't say a word. They finally lifted my sister to carry her out and was reaching for me when my sister peed on the one guy. He dropped her and she started crying. My uncle heard her and came running. The guys bolted. I still think about that all the time. We were so lucky that day. My wife and I stopped at a park with our then 7-year-old daughter. My wife went off on her own for a few to look at some trees while I took my daughter over to the bank of the lake. Seemingly of nowhere, this really creepy guy walked up and started addressing my daughter while ignoring me. He was going on about how to attract the ducks and was positioning himself in a way to get in between us. I did a quick calculation where I had a base set up to kick his ass into the ropes along the edge of the lake, which would trip him at his knees and send him into the water. I had my daughter by the hand and just interrupted the guy and pulled her away. The guy turned around and went right to his car and left immediately. My instincts were strongly indicating that this man was intending to abduct my daughter, and the chills from that experience still haunt me many years later. When I was about 6 years old, this would have been around 1990, I was riding my big wheel bike down my block in a DC suburb. The way our street was situated, at the end of the block was the entrance to an alleyway that took you behind all the houses. I would frequently turn down the alley and go behind our house and enter through our back gate. As I got towards the end of the block, a car was coming and I stopped and waved my hand indicating that they could go ahead and I would wait for them to pass. The driver in the car refused to go and motioned for me to turn instead, so I went ahead and entered the alley. I got about halfway up the alley, not quite to my house, when someone grabbed me from behind. It was the driver and she was pissed. She had turned into the alley after me, drove down, parked her car in the middle of the alley and gotten out. She yanked me up by the arm and screamed in my face, "Don't you ever use police signals with me." I immediately began sobbing, ran to my house and told my parents. By the time they ran out the back door, the driver was gone. I'm 38 now and still think about it. I was desperately hunting for an apartment in Berlin 7 to 9 years back and decided to try Craigslist to see if I can find any. There was one woman looking for a roommate, and after sending her a quick email she promptly answered quite fast actually. We agreed that she can show her apartment the next evening, and I found myself there the next day with terrible weather. The apartment was at the top floor with no elevator. When she opened the door for me I realized this might be a weird one. She seemed quite groggy, spoke well but weirdly, and gave it off vibe a little bit. The kitchen in the room she was renting was nice and clean, but I got a glimpse of her room which was incredibly messy and just reeked. The bathroom had a big tub that was filled to the brim with water. I asked if she was going to take a bath jokingly and she just shrugged and said it didn't work, which itself didn't make sense. We went to the kitchen to chat more and she seated me with my back to the entryway, so I didn't see anything behind me or in the rooms. Almost instantly I hear something moving in one of the rooms and I asked if she had a friend in the apartment. She didn't even answer this but started to babble about something else. My spider senses went haywire and something in my head just said leave now, so I just stood up and quickly grabbed my shoes and got myself out of the apartment while shouting, "Thanks," in the stairway. In the evening she sent me an email that totaled like 5 pages about God and some absolutely nutty stuff. Needless to say I blocked her and hopefully never run into her again. I used to work at a liquor store, and while I was on a smoke break a guy came up, started small talking to me in bad English. He was 40-something Latino guy and he just had this look like he was not right in the head. He said he wanted to buy something, so I went in and he got nude magazines and cleaning products. I didn't say a word but he looked at me and raised his eyebrows and said, "My house is going to be fun tonight, you should come by." I said no and gave him a really disgusted look. He leaves and I shake it off. A few minutes later a teenager on a skateboard comes in and gets a Coke. He leaves and I hear talking outside, but I had customers so I couldn't see what was going on. After a little bit the older guy comes back in and buys beer and duct tape. This time he's looking away from and not talking. I ring him up and demands a black bag. I bag his stuff and he leaves, then the talking ensues. I poke my head outside. He was talking to the teenager. He goes over and quickly puts the bag in the truck but pulls out the beer. Heads over to the passenger side, opening it and putting the beer in it, then waves over the teenager. I ran up and asked the kid what he's doing. He tries saying, "None of your business, man," and I very clearly explain, "I don't care about the beer if he bought it for you. This dude bought duct tape, cleaning products and nude magazines. The beer is the least of my concerns. I'm about to call the cops on this guy, don't go with him." He gives me a shocked look and says, "What the fuck? He just offered me a ride, I'm not into that shit." As he's getting on his skateboard the man gets really upset with me and pulls out a knife saying something in Spanish. So I pull out my phone and pretend I'm recording him cause my POS phone had super cracked screen and only used it for receiving calls. But I memorize his license plate as he starts getting in his truck. He leaves and I call the cops immediately. Lucky he paid for the cleaning products and magazines with a credit card but paid cash for the duct tape and beer. The cops tell me that truck and license plate has a warrant for arrest. Wouldn't tell me what for but said they would find him and thoroughly thanked me for warning the teenager, though I wonder what he's done. I was 7. One of our neighbors was walking while I was playing in the yard. She asked me some questions. My mom came out and spoke to her. Everything seemed normal. My mom went back inside. Now I was playing with my dolls outside, typical little girl playing with her baby doll. She leans in and starts talking to me. She says something like, "You could be my little dolly. I'll dress you, change you. You can be my pretty helpless doll." Then I remember her giving me a kiss. I freaked out and ran inside. My mom came out, talked to the lady, and didn't believe me. I was really into hitchhiking in California years ago. 99% of the drivers were super cool and I made great memories. And then about 1 in 100 drivers were creepy AF or just really weird. So many crazy stories. The craziest and creepiest was on a month-long hitchhiking trip up and down the 101. In the middle of the night I got picked up by a van. Almost immediately when I entered the car I got some yellow flags, trash everywhere, a rancid stank, and the dude was morbidly and visually unclean. I tried to make a little small talk and introduced myself as usual, but he didn't respond. Just kept driving. Red flag number 1 was the first thing this dude said to me in a dead-ass serious tone was, "Haven't been a lot of murders this year, have there?" I nervously laughed and started thinking about an exit plan. Red flag number 2 was I realized the van locks had been cut off. They were the pop up and down door locks and they were just chopped down, so I couldn't unlock the door. I started freaking out a little bit and he was also driving really fast. I ended up faking like I was sick and about to throw up. I got him to pull over but he didn't turn off the car or unlock the doors. I frantically climbed back into the back of the van, and Jimmy D'd the trunk open. I then sprinted into the forest. Still gives me chills to think about that encounter to this day. I was alone at the gas station when a guy in a brown suit holding some container of pink liquid came out of a white panel van and walked over to me. He told me that he was selling the liquid as some kind of carpet cleaner. I still lived at home and had no need to add to my parents' cleaning supplies, especially since this was an unmarked container that looked like paint remover. I explained this to him while just having a bad feeling in general. I don't know exactly why, but my spidey sense was tingling. He asked where I was going and I exaggerated a board game night at my friend's into a party at my friend's house. He smiled and said, "I bet you get all the girls at a party like that. I used to be like that when I was younger." He continued. Then, something changed in his face and my internal danger sense lowered. "We're cool, man," he said as he smiled at me and closed himself back into the panel van. It could have been a face value interaction, but to this day I feel like it would have been a big problem if we weren't cool by the end of the conversation. I am a petite woman and I was walking my dog before a hike in the early AM in the city. I cross paths with a man going the opposite direction and make eye contact and give a polite smile. The man abruptly turns around and starts walking behind me. I turn, he turns, the next block, I turn, he turns, the third turn. When he followed me, I start to jog a little and look back and he has started to jog. I take out my cell phone and wake up my husband and yelling into my phone say, "Hey, I'm almost home, can you meet me outside the house?" I stayed on the phone with him repeating the same request. He was confused but complied, and when I made the last turn onto my block, the man turned the opposite way. I was shaking and immediately broke down crying when I got to my husband waiting for me outside. I always wonder what this man's motives were or what would have happened if I hadn't taken out my phone and called my husband. I was riding the bus home from work one day and was a dozen or so stops away from my stop when a woman wearing a mask, pre-pandemic, so it was out of the ordinary, but still not totally strange, got on. As she walked down the aisle, she loudly announced to the bus, "I have SARS, Ebola, and HIV." Of course she sat down right behind me. As we rode along, she had a few loud, strange outbursts, but everyone just politely gave her a wide berth, as there was clearly something mentally going wrong with her. We were 3 to 4 stops away from where I normally got off when she leaned forward to whisper in my ear, "I'm gonna lick your neck." And then she did. When I was 13, I took the bus to the local Walmart, and as I was approaching the store, a woman stopped me and complimented the bag I was carrying. It was a hippie-looking bag I'd borrowed from my mom, and I thanked her and told her just that it was my mom's. She complimented me for being real about that and then offered for her and her husband to give me a ride home. I felt really uncomfortable and said no. I'd also just arrived at the store and hadn't even had a chance to go in. She gave me a business card for some kind of car-related business, like a mechanic, and told me to email her, and I went on my way. I never did email her. Whole thing made me uncomfortable as hell. Really felt like I almost got trafficked or something. The other one that sticks out in my mind, I'm not even sure if it was real or if I can describe it in a way that does any justice to how bizarre it felt. I was probably 8 or 9, and I lived in a small apartment complex. I strapped on my rollerblades and was gonna head out to skate around the complex. As I often did, I rolled down the sidewalk away from our door, and looked down the long, straight pathway that was just on the other side of the wall our door was on. At the end of it, a good few hundred feet away, I saw what looked like an old person dressed in a white formless garment. They looked wrong somehow. They spotted me just as I spotted them. Then, with the most unnatural movements, they began very quickly moving towards me. Luckily, I was about 20 feet away from my front door, so I rolled back the way I came, and stepped back inside and locked the door. I remember so clearly standing there against the door with my heart pounding out of my chest. To this day I have no explanation for this memory. Nothing like it ever happened again. Pretty sure I was almost abducted as a 9 or 10-year-old. I showed up at a neighborhood playground, and it was empty except for a man standing there. He called out to me, and I came a bit closer. I don't remember having a real concept of stranger danger, like they teach it, but I knew something was fishy. He said he just found these basketball cards, and wanted to give them to me, but the pack was clearly just freshly opened by him. And furthermore, I collected baseball cards, not basketball. If they'd been baseball cards, who knows what kind of danger I could have gotten in. I declined. He insisted. I declined again. I turned with my little bike and got out of there. As far as I know, he didn't chase after me or anything. I don't think I fully understood the danger I was in. I didn't even mention the encounter to my parents until years later. I filed away the memory, and then years later it popped up and a light bulb went off. I was taking the bus home with my dog one night. Noticed a man sitting a few rows further down staring at me. Like, really staring, not just looking. It went on for some 10 minutes. The bus approached the last stop before mine, and for some reason I decided to slip out just as the doors closed. Even though he made me uncomfortable, it didn't really have anything to do with the guy. I think I decided to let my dog stretch her legs a little before bed. I'm a brisk walker and was striding ahead. As I made it about 100 meters or so down the path towards the neighborhood I lived in, the man suddenly caught up, having gone out of his way to get off the bus, at what was obviously not his stop. After I slipped through the closing doors, he tried to make small talk, and complimented my smile. I never smiled at him or anyone else on the bus, but I tried to politely brush him off and be on my way. He then got in front of me and blocked my path, got in my face and very aggressively asked, "What? I'm giving you a compliment, you don't want to talk to me?" Out of the blue, a young woman appeared, asking for the nearby university. It was literally a stone toss up the road, so she knew exactly what she was doing. As we walked towards the university, the man skulked back to the bus stop. I think about this girl every now and then, and have no doubt she saved me from what could have become a very scary encounter. Thing is, if I had decided to wait for my bus stop, I would have exited almost right outside where I lived, in a dark and secluded one-way street. There would have been no one to save me from any kind of encounter there. So, about 15 years ago, I lived in Jerusalem. One night, I'm on my way home, and I see this guy, long hair and beard, just staring at me as I walk past, never blinking. Now, when you live in Jerusalem and someone is being dodgy, your first thought is, terrorist. So I tense up, start to walk faster, getting ready to run if I need to, when suddenly he calls my name. I turn around, and I look at him better, and I have no idea who that is. This guy looks homeless, so I say, "Sorry," thinking I misheard, and he didn't say my name after all, and he goes, "Yeah, it's you." And he starts to laugh and walks away. To be honest, I never thought of it as creepy, just weird, but when other people hear the story, they seem to think it is creepy. I just always wondered if he was like a schoolmate of mine that I just don't remember, and that has fallen on some rough times. My cousin and I were walking through Waikiki a few years back and we laughed about something pretty loud. A homeless man imitated our laughter in an almost caricature way, but then kept doing it and began running towards us, from behind. Laughing in the same way we did but getting louder and louder, we started running because at this point he was in a full sprint. No idea what the fuck that was about. Outside of that, my cousin and I were maybe 9 or 10 and were playing in the yard at my grandmother's house. Blue van pulls up on the side of the road. No windows, and two guys get out with it still running and start walking towards us. We ran inside the house and got an adult, and they peel off. I 100% believe they intended to kidnap us. Years ago I was in Edinburgh for the Fringe Festival. I was drunk walking back to my hotel when I passed by a bar and I hear an American voice say, "Hug me, it's my birthday." She was cute and she sounded sad, so I gave her a hug, a cigarette, and we started talking. We chatted for a few minutes. I can't remember many of the small details, but I remember a few things that big red flags for me. The first was that she said she was in the UK doing an internship in becoming a pharmacist, and every so often a word just wouldn't come out right. It just hit my ears wrong. My sister-in-law is a pharmacist, and I remembered her talking about how hard it was to get her program to sign off on an internship in another state, let alone another country, and I got lost in that thought for a second when the girl said she just wanted to ditch her friends and go anywhere else. And that's when it hit me why her words weren't hitting my ear right. She was trying to hide an accent. Sounded Irish to me, but it didn't matter. At this point I had decided that I wanted to keep my kidneys, so I gave her another cigarette and a hug, wished her a happy birthday and walked away. I don't know that I dodged a bullet, but I'm pretty sure I was going to end up robbed or worse. One time I was walking home with my daughter, about 7 years at the time. We were walking down a short street leading off of a main road. As we were about to turn off into a different street, I noticed a man running across the main road against the lights. For whatever reason he put me on edge, but he was a fair distance away from us, so I thought I was probably just being paranoid and decided to be extra vigilant. He was probably about 5 to 10 minutes walk behind us at that stage. I didn't say anything to my daughter as I didn't want to scare her. So she's straggling along, staring at the ground, and keeps falling a step or two behind me. I turn around to grab her hand to hurry her along, and this guy is standing right behind me. So close that he was walking right next to my daughter, and so silently that neither of us noticed. He almost bumped into me when I stopped walking. That's how close he was to us. I let out an almost involuntary, "Oh shit," right in his face. He says, "Hi," and immediately takes off running down a side street. I don't know what his plan was, but it couldn't have been anything innocent. I'm pretty sure that we were just about to be sexually assaulted, but that my lucky split-second reaction scared him off just before he could act. If you guys liked this video, please drop a like and subscribe, and also check out my Instagram account Scary Time that is linked in the description, and as always, stay scary.